Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic crash of Air India Boeing 787 Flight 171. I'm Jeffrey Thomas and delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good evening, Richard.
And good evening, Jeffrey.
And I'm now in Strasbourg, France, just on the border of Germany. So this
Oh,
episode is,
getting too close for comfort, Jeffrey.
yes, yeah. So hot and heavy, episode 122. There are two things that all the experts and analysts agree on. One is the outside temperature was hot, the aircraft weight was heavy. What are the consequences of a hot air temperature and what are the consequences of a heavy aircraft weight? Let us look at the first issue. The outside air temperature was indeed hot. Now, at Neil OS 2085 says engineers, pilots could a dual engine flame out shortly after takeoff be caused by water contamination from either condensation inside the fuel tanks, e.g., after the aircraft was parked in hot, humid conditions without proper sump checks, or from water ingress via degraded seals, vents, or access panels. Even with standard detection systems, is it still possible that undetected water could accumulate and disrupt fuel delivery under high demand? And Purdra Prasad 8650, thank you, gentlemen, for your technical insights. I believe your questions and comments are very relevant to make some sense of what happened. As a retired avionics engineer, I tried to raise some of these issues in another post, hoping someone with the appropriate authority might listen. Why are Air India aircraft kept for long hours on the ground in hot climates with no air conditioning? Is this a procedure? Do they instruct their staff to reduce or switch off air conditioning? Richard, it's over to you.
Well, some very good comments and questions. The Boeing 787-8 was on the ground for around 3 hours, and the outside temperature was indeed close to 40 degrees centigrade, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity was 62%. So condensation can occur, especially during refueling in a hot and humid climate. The aircraft had previously arrived from Delhi. The flight AIC 423 left Delhi at 10:07 local time, where the air temperature was 40.6 degrees centigrade. It cruised at an altitude of 32,000 feet, where the temperature is minus 35.8 degrees centigrade, and lands in Ahmedabad at 11:16, where the temperature is plus 38.0 degrees centigrade. So, that's a huge temperature span backwards and forwards. And if warm, humid air enters the fuel tank during refueling, and the tank of fuel is at cooler, moisture in the air can condense into water droplets. Jet fuel can contain dissolved or suspended water. As temperature drops during flight, dissolved water can come out of the solution and form free water. The Boeing 787 mitigates these issues by having water separators, filters, and to avoid freezing ice contamination, the fuel oil heater exchangers, FOHEs, prevent ice crystals from forming at altitude. So the FOHE is part of the Master Minimum Equipment List, MMEL, and the 787 has to fulfill this minimum equipment list. what you need to know is the fuel quantity indication system, the FQIS, on board, um, and the fuel management computers will measure the quantity of the fuel and the fuel rates, but it will not measure the quality of the fuel. And there is, on top of all of that, one unconfirmed report in social media from a guy called Akash Vatsa, a passenger on the AIC 423 flight from Delhi. And he said, by the way, the air conditioning on board was not working. So, you need to do your homework, basically.
Mm. Robert Rolfe, 8528. Why is the fuel measured in kilos and not in gallons? And Thomas Bunyan, 3826. Come on, boys. We all fill our cars up gallons or liters. Okay.
Yeah, good point. The reason why fuel is measured by weight in kilos or pounds in the aircraft case and not by volume in gallons or liters is because of temperature. The weight of fuel does not change with temperature, but the volume of fuel does change with temperature. So volume increases with temperature and decreases with altitude. For example, 1,000 liters of Jet A1 fuel has a weight of around 784 kilos at 30 degrees centigrade, and the density of the fuel is around 0.784 kilo per liter at 30 degrees centigrade. The same fuel weight of 784 kilos at not at 30 degrees centigrade, but at 3 degrees centigrade is with a density of 0.809 kilo per liter and has a volume of 969 liters instead of 1,000. If you want to think about it the other way around, 1,000 liters of Jet A1 fuel had a weight of 784 kilos at 30 degrees centigrade. It has a weight of 809 kilos at 3 degrees centigrade. So, the density changes. And if you measure by volume, you can think you've used up fuel or you have more fuel than you really do have simply because you changed altitude and the temperature outside changed. And after a while, the temperature in the fuel tank will change.
Of course, the other thing too is the weight of the fuel is what is used in all the weight and balance. Because
Yeah.
all the cargo is in kilos and the passengers are in kilos, the baggage is in kilos, so the fuel has to be in kilos as well.
And when you travel as a passenger, you think you're a person rather than kilos.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I take umbrage at being considered a kilo. What about other issues of aircraft weight? How does that affect the flight, Richard?
Well, the aircraft weight affects the takeoff, the cruise, and the landing of an aircraft. So we're talking about a crash that occurred on takeoff, so let's focus on that. With a heavy aircraft, you need a longer runway for the takeoff roll. You require a higher takeoff speed to generate enough lift. You need more engine thrust. You will experience a reduced climb performance, especially if the air temperature is high. And if an aircraft weight and balance is incorrectly calculated, the result of that will range from, the minimum an inefficient takeoff to the maximum a catastrophic result. And several viewers have commented on the runway length, the takeoff speed, the loss of thrust, and the lack of lift.
Yeah. At Steve 7089, I'm not a licensed pilot on the 787, but aircraft mostly always follow each other in design. Same cake and different recipe. Well, yes. So what do you think of this that I posted several days ago? Complete electrical failure, high angle of attack on takeoff, engines with such a long distance from the wing, no pressure from the boost pumps, no fuel to the engine driven pump, then no fuel from the fuel control unit, dual flame out both engines at the same time. Engines are completely independent of each other, so why only fuel can stop engines? There is no vapor lock because engines are already primed and running. Vapor lock will only be at engine start. That's why you use boost pumps to clear the lines, etc. I believe boost pump PX is around 60 psi. For fuel contamination, I don't think this has anything to do with it. Fuel is taken from the lowest point. It would have shown up much earlier unless, which is possible, it is held somewhere and on rotation it came down, which is highly unlikely. But this would mean both wings would have to have the same contamination, which honestly would not happen. Any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts on that, Steve. I hate to think how many ICAS messages this scenario would generate. Many of those messages would be critical and requiring immediate action. We're showing a screenshot of a hypothetical list of ICAS messages that would be generated. And we go through the list: electrical bus left, right, off, generator left, right, off, stall warning, fuel pump left, right, forward, aft, pressure, hydraulic pressure system left, right, low, engine 1, 2, hydraulic pump, engine 1 fail, engine 2 fail, engine fail both engines, APU start, RAT deployed, and no doubt there is a significant number of other messages received.
Yes, so you certainly know there was a problem.
Yeah.
Henrik Alstig and Steve 7089. Hi. The booster pumps in the wing supplies pressurized fuel down to the gear driven low pressure pump on the engine. The engine should work perfectly fine, even with the booster pumps in the wing supplies pressurized even at low power due to the suction feed from the engine driven low pressure pump and gravity feed from the wing. This is tested many times during the development of the aircraft. So, the idea that engines would experience fuel starvation due to power loss, I do not believe at all, especially not both engines simultaneously, not a chance. The talk of vapor lock is not completely impossible, of course, but rather close to impossible. This is because the aircraft was just fueled prior to departure with a lot of new fuel. The fuel that comes up from the hydrant system is not particularly warm. The composite material in the wing supplies is the perfect insulation, so it will take a very long time to warm up the fuel in the wing from the heat outside. Also, the aircraft have taxied out to the runway using about 500 kilos to 600 kilos of fuel, and the takeoff run would have used a whole lot more to cool off any heated piping, etc. So I would consider that option highly unlikely. And also, flights have been carried out in similar or higher temperatures all around the globe for decades without a single occurrence of this anywhere before on any heavy jet. And both engines at the same time, nah, not so likely. This is a real head scratcher to guess, actually. But usually it is always a chain of events, and by far the most cases are human factors involved somehow, either pilots or maintenance crew or a combination of this somehow. This is my guess. Design or manufacturing error cannot be ruled out either, of course, at this stage.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting comment, Per Henrich. And I would say the scenario described by Steve is one of the most critical failure combinations imaginable. But Per Henrik, you make some good points. I would say both our experts, Steve and Per Henrik, agree that this is not a single failure and point to a sequence or chain of events. Whether these events comprise design failures, like Steve mentions, engines with such a long distance from the wing, I doubt. But as Per Henrik points out, flights have been carried out in the similar or higher temperatures all around the globe for decades without a single occurrence of this sort of event anywhere before and not on a heavy jet. Whether these events comprise mechanical failures, pilot errors, maintenance errors, or a combination, as Per Hendrik points out, is, as he says, guesswork at this stage. We know the engine start was successful. We know the taxi time of 11 minutes, 9 seconds went smoothly. We know the aircraft became airborne to a normal altitude above the end of the runway, 625 feet above mean sea level, an ascent of 445 feet. But we also know it was a slower ground speed of 170 knots as opposed to an average of 184 knots on previous flights of the same aircraft. We know that the aircraft could not maintain altitude and crashed 23 seconds later. We also know the captain is reported making a mayday call, thrust not achieved, falling, mayday, mayday, mayday.
Imperfect Stranger also responding to Steve. There has been a previous incident on the 7878 where fuel contamination has affected both engines almost simultaneously. The fuel valves on the engines were gummed up with a residue of biocide. It involved a Jetstar 787-8 on descent into Osaka. Both engines went down below idle speed. Thankfully, the aircraft landed safely. I don't know if the rat deployed because of the sub-idle engine speed.
Yeah, the Jetstar flight JST-15 was a Boeing 787-8 en route from Cairns in Australia to Osaka, Japan on the 29th of March 2019. During the descent into Osaka airport, around about 16,100 feet, there was a dual engine thrust rollback. There was an ICAS message with a thrust warning. Then there was an engine surge. And then three ICAS messages, typically engine one fail, engine two fail, engine fail, both engines. And engines were below idle for 8 seconds on the left engine and 81 seconds on the right engine. The investigation found out that there was fuel contamination. It was, as mentioned, from Cathon FP1.5 biocide, and it was found in both fuel tanks.
Right. Yesterday we said we would look into the landing gear retraction. Now we're showing you a gear swing video. We actually may show you stills of that gear swing video. The time from gear up to gear stowed is 42 seconds. The time from gear down to gear extended is 25 seconds. We have comments on the premature cleanup as well. OU 7868B, reporters were allowed to trample upon the debris even on the second night of the crash. The area should have been cordoned off and full security should have been provided to avoid contamination or even tampering of the evidence. Such breach should not be allowed. Indian authorities should implement international standards for this type of investigation. And, oh my God, underscore LOL, I was surprised at how the debris was loaded, just like loading soil into a dump truck. And Andy Turbo, hi Richard and Jeffrey, I absolutely agree. I was shocked when seeing the footage of them removing the tail wreckage already. So much potential evidence is no doubt contaminated or lost.
Yeah, very good points. And we expressed our concerns yesterday that the cleanup operation appears premature and may indeed compromise the investigation. There has been no official announcement from the investigation team so far. According to the Times of India, on site teams are conducting meticulous debris mapping and sealing critical wreckage in moisture proof containers as part of evidence preservation, especially in light of the monsoon conditions potentially impacting the crash site. But on the other hand, if you're putting in the bulldozers and leveling everything off, there's going to be some evidence you're going to miss.
Jenny Clark, 5232. I posted this on your Monday video. This now makes me wonder even more so. Not an aviation expert in any way, shape, or form, but I find this separately a high-level committee set up by the Indian government to examine the reasons behind the crash is expected to hold its first meeting on Monday. The committee will submit a preliminary report within 3 months, the All India Radio said, and will propose new standard operating procedures, SOPs, to help prevent similar incidents in the future, quoted on the BBC News website, which is a very odd thing to say. To me, it suggests something has been done wrong by a human somewhere along the line if they're talking about changes to SOPs. Surely at this stage they will have no idea if this is necessary, or please tell me if I'm missing something.
Yeah, Jenny, I don't think you're missing anything. The high level committee says it will not interfere with the AAIB India or the AAIB UK or the NTSB US or Boeing or GE in the technical analysis and their safety recommendations. They say they will be looking at the systemic regulatory issues, the organizational lapses with Air India and the Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation, and they will be looking at the crisis response protocols. They'll be looking at the aircraft leasing and maintenance practices. And finally, they'll be looking at the pilot training policies. Now, the Indian government quite likely wants to retain full strategic visibility and control over how findings are handled, especially if a legal or trade consequence arises from this. So I agree, Jenny, this dual process is unusual. The BBC reported India's Civil Aviation Ministry said on Tuesday that a recent inspection of Air India's Boeing 787 fleet, 24 out of the 33 aircraft have been checked so far, did not reveal any major safety concern, adding that the planes and maintenance systems complied with existing standards. India has 27 787-8 and 6 787-9 aircraft, a total of 33. 27 are leased and 6 were purchased.
T-Rex, Bravo 7 Delta. Damn, these aviation reports take so long. I want to know what makes it take so much time, like black box, cockpit voice, and video recorder were found in this case, and real-time data was also recorded. So what makes it so difficult to reach a conclusion, soon?
Yeah, Jeffrey, what's your view on that?
Well, so we can get the CVR and the digital flight data recorder, and we can read those, and we can listen to the commentary in the cockpit, and we'll find out what happened. But then we have to ask, why did it happen? And it's the why that can take years of forensic analysis to understand. I mean, obviously, some crashes are open and shut. A pilot landed on a runway in bad weather. It landed too long down the runway, skidded off the runway and down an embankment. That happened to Air India Express 737. That's pretty easy to resolve what happened there. And there are many other crashes that the yes, we know what happened, but why did it happen? And that's what takes the time. You agree with that, Richard?
Yes, and I would add with this dual process, the investigation and then this high level committee, it might even take longer. If there was a critical issue with the aircraft, with the pilots, with the Ahmedabad airport, the maintenance, the fuel, with Air India, then we really do need to know as soon as possible in order to prevent this happening again. It'll be interesting to see if a preliminary report is issued within 30 days.
Well, it's supposed to be issued within 30 days. I see some reports saying that they're going to take 3 months. Well, technically, then it's supposed to be 30 days. But can I add something else here, Richard, too? In some jurisdictions around the world, France is one, Italy's another, the police are involved with air crash investigations. And all of a sudden, it becomes a criminal investigation. And people who might have evidence who clam up, they seek legal representation. That slows up the process dramatically when it gets into the legal framework. So that's another dynamic to this, to air crashes. Yes,
Yeah.
so we'll move on. So Richard, from Christian Siligai, 2028. Can you please comment on the new theory about the possible failure of full authority digital engine control, FADEC, electronic control card, ECC, also referred to as the electronic engine controller, EEC, or engine control unit, ECU? Even if I agree it is highly speculative, I think having some technical details about this possibility could be instructive. Thanks.
Yeah, well, good comment, Christian, and I'm happy to supply a few technical details. The FADEC is a dual system, so one system is active and the other is a hot standby that can take over instantly if there is a failure. The FADEC uses multiple redundant sensors to monitor, for example, the engine start, the manual throttle settings, auto throttle settings, fuel cutoff switches, thrust reverser operation, and so on. The FADEC also knows the air temperature, the pressure, the density. It receives engine RPM, temperatures and pressures. It knows the airspeed, altitude, rate of climb, angle of attack, and so on. it checks what is going on, basically, and it checks the safety limits are not breached. And it is continually checking itself. It has a built-in test equipment, BITE, BITE, and investigators will have this information already because the ACARS data from the previous flight and possibly also from the crash flight prior to takeoff or just after takeoff, there is an ACARS report that comes through via satellite or VHF, and I assume they will have that data. And it's about time, I think, that they made that public so we could all have a look and see what the aircraft says it was doing at that point in time.
Yes, it's interesting that this data hasn't been released as yet to 787 operators around the world. I mean, then it would be out into the public arena very quickly. It's really curious that possibly none of these elements were responsible for what happened, quite possibly.
Yeah, so there is the ICAO 30-day preliminary report, and we perhaps need to be patient for 30 days, but I fully expect this data to be available. So I want the ACARS data, I want the ATSC reports of the cockpit voice recorder, the FDR, the digital video. I mean, all of this is available, and it should be no problem to report on it.
No, I agree. I agree. Well, viewers, that's all we have enough time for today. Thank you very much indeed, Richard, for all the work that you've done on this. Viewers, tomorrow, Richard's will not be available, but I will be back to give a wrap up on the Paris Air Show, which I've been attending this week. And if there's any particular update on the 787 investigation, I'll bring that news to you as well. But Richard and I'll both be back on Saturday to bring you up to date with the very latest developments and also answer your questions. So thank you for subscribing to us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the questions. They're really super. And Richard, thank you again for all your work on this today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.